Good afternoon and welcome to this event. My name is Jon Cheek. I'm here from UniTasterDays and this is a UniTaster Tuesday, where today we're going to be exploring university courses in policing. I'm really delighted to be joined by Colin Baker, who is joining us from the University of Law. Colin is a lecturer in the policing team over there, and Colin's going to give us an idea of what to expect on a policing course, and also some examples of what you might actually study when you're looking at a policing course as well. So with that, I'll pass things straight over to Colin. Over to you, Colin.
Okay, thanks very much, John. So, as John said, I'm a lecturer in the BSc in professional policing at the University of Law. So this particular degree is what's known as the police, it's a pre-join degree. So that is a degree that you would complete prior to joining the police. Now, there are several routes into the police, whereby you actually join the police and then you do a degree during your first 2 or 3 years, depending on whether you have a degree prior to joining or not. I'm going to specifically talk to you about the pre-join degree, which is offered at our university and other universities up and down the country. Although a lot of it is personal choice, I would just add on a personal note that I think the advantages of doing a pre-join degree is you still get that student experience. Okay, obviously if you join the police and then do the degree whilst you're in the police, there's some advantages there in terms of the fact you're being paid and so on. But what you do miss out probably is that real student experience that you would get by doing a pre-join degree. So I'm just going to talk to you briefly about that. So the degree, a pre-join degree is basically is exactly what it says really. During the 3 years of your degree, you would cover a number of topics which would overlap very much with some of the stuff that you would traditionally be taught when you join the police. So many years ago, or for many years, and not in the too distant past, police officers would join the police. They would go to a training school, depending on where you were. In the Metropolitan Police, it would be Hendon, and they do 18 weeks there, and then be put out onto the streets in a supervised capacity for another 10 weeks, and then receive some continual training over until the sort of 2-year period when that officer then would be a substantive officer, and to a large degree there wasn't maybe a lot of continual professional development. Now within this 3 years you will cover a very wide range of topics, from the roles of understanding the police constable, which actually is very much focused on how policing has evolved since 1829, and are the policing principles that Robert Peel put down, the 9 policing principles, are they still relevant today? You will look at information, intelligence and digital policing. So that's at the other end of the spectrum there, how far policing has changed and how it is likely to change between now and 2025. There is a policing vision to 2025. And obviously a lot of it is about embracing the digital era, how the perceptions that for the public have changed in terms of how they wish to interact with the police. Interestingly, a survey found that only 11% of the people now actually would prefer their main contact with the police to be face-to-face. Most people want it to be in a more digital and remote way. Also, there's an impact for officers as well and about how they do their job. They've got body-worn videos, they've got handsets now where they can digitally communicate, and also how the police service interacts with the criminal justice system. And obviously the vision being for 2025 that everything would be digital. From point of arrest to court hearing, everything would be digital and secure. What else would you cover during that degree? You would cover issues around risk and vulnerability. So not just risk to yourself as a police officer and the personal safety risk, but managing risk in other areas. Now that could be in relation to domestic abuse. It could be in terms of risk to the organisation. Terrorism is another massive topic which you would cover during the course of the degree. And also in addition to this, there'll be some quite interesting elective modules that you could take. Many of them are crossovers into criminal psychology and also into criminology. So although it is a policing degree, it's actually a real wide range of topics that you would cover, say covering from history almost into criminal psychology, as well as a lot of really, really practical policing. which is where I want to sort of go next, really. So the policing degree is an academic degree. It is a BSc, but it isn't probably like what you would call your traditional academic degree. So within the degree itself, there's a lot of emphasis on role playing, on oral presentation. There's a virtual reality suite where you can actually reenact scenarios of sudden death, of domestic abuse and violence in a safe, controlled and sort of highly relevant environment. Many of you will have played games, digital and video games, and it'd be very familiar to you. But it's a really, really safe way of unpicking how to deal with incidents. In addition to that, we have a bespoke crime scene in a building, which can be used for any number of things. So that can be for searching of houses and looking for property and securing property evidentially. It can be for conducting role plays around domestic abuse and arresting and just dealing with confrontational situations. So having said all that, I just thought I would give you now a little bit of a flavour of some of the type of more practical stuff that maybe you would cover on a policing degree. And I've chosen the sort of very topical but very emotive subject of stop and search. So what we're going to look at is, why might somebody be stopped? And also, when they are stopped, what illegal things might you expect to find during a search? So I think a good way to do this is to look through just a number of little scenarios where I'll throw the scenario out to you. And if you are able to, when you're watching the video, if you wish to pause it and maybe just make a few thoughts or jot a few things down yourself, and then I will sort of give you some of the background to it and maybe the answers as much as they can be. But quite often in these situations, there is no right and wrong. And obviously, there's a lot of subjectivity and people all see things in different ways, which you should always consider. And I think that's another interesting point about the policing degree. There's a lot of very lively and quite emotive debating that would go on during a policing degree. And quite often, there isn't one right answer. So as you can see from this slide, we are putting you in the situation where you're an officer and you're walking around the park. You're in uniform and there's a couple of people sat on a bench in a park, shouting and arguing with each other. So you go over to them and ask them what's happening. They say nothing to you and they just get up and walk off. So what's your thoughts on this then? If you've got a moment, take a moment to have a think about whether you would be able to stop and search them in this scenario. In this scenario, you wouldn't be able to conduct a search. You would need to really have seen something else to make you suspicious of a crime being or about to be committed. You wouldn't be able to search or detain these people. A couple having an argument is not an uncommon scenario. You could ask them a few questions, but they wouldn't necessarily have to answer you. You could go over and do a stop and account though, so you could try and speak to them and find out who they were. And depending on how that goes and whether or not, as a result, you develop some other reasonable suspicion, maybe as a part of something that they say to you, or they might make an allegation that one of them has threatened the other one with a knife, in which case the circumstances would change. But other than that, you would not be able to detain them and stop them for the purposes of a search. So, obviously it is quite dangerous in this park. So you're in another corner of the park and there are two people stood with their backs to the rest of the park. As you can see from the slide, they keep turning to look over their shoulders and it looks like one of them is passing something to the other one. As you walk over to them, they start to walk away from you. Have a think about what you might consider as your actions would be in this particular scenario. So you can stop and detain them if what you saw is reasonable grounds for suspicion of an illegal activity. This could be looking for weapons, drugs, or a link to a previous crime such as stolen property. If you are looking for drugs and have reasonable grounds to suspect that any person in possession of a controlled drug, then the legislation that you would search them under would be Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, not Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So, in this third scenario then you see a man wearing a red top and joggers. Well, they look like they're blue in this slide. So you see a man wearing red top and joggers that matches the description of a possible mugging perpetrator. This mugger was known to be called Tom Clark. So do you think you'd be able to stop and search the guy in the blue, the red top and joggers in this scenario? Well, maybe. First, you must make a reasonable attempt to confirm your suspicion. If they show you identification to prove that they aren't that person, then your grounds would probably stop there. Unless the identification is forged, of course, or you suspect it to be. However, the bigger point here is that if the person is wanted, you would actually just arrest them and you wouldn't stop and search them. Of course, you could search them once you've arrested them, but you must have reasonable grounds to suspect when you're stopping someone that you will find something to use under Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act for stop and search. So in this particular scenario, if you'd arrested him, you would have searched him under Section 32 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So, number 4, you meet 3 people you suspect of being involved in a previous crime. You make reasonable checks and you still have strong suspicion. One is wearing a balaclava, one is wearing a scarf covering their face, and another a burqa. Can you ask any of them to remove the item? Ultimately, yes, you could, all 3 of them. According to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984, there is no power to require a person to remove any clothing in public other than an outer coat, jacket, or gloves, except under Section 60AA of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, which provides a specific power to demand the removal of disguises. But it will only be if there was a Section 60 in place at that time and for that location. If a Section 60 was in place, then a constable can, under this Act and section, require any person to remove any item which the constable reasonably believes that person is wearing wholly or mainly for the purpose of concealing his identity. Seize any item which the constable believes any person intends to wear wholly or mainly for that purpose. So, if all the conditions are met, and you believe this was the case, you could require all 3 people in the group to remove their items. Where there might be a religious sensitivity around ordering the removal of an item, the officer should permit the item to be removed out of public view, and where practical, the item should be removed in the presence of an officer of the same sex and out of sight of anyone of the opposite sex. However, again, if you think they have committed a crime and they are wanted, you would arrest them. You stop and search if you have reasonable suspicion that you will find something. What are you looking for here? What do you suspect them of? Once again, if you arrested them, you would then search them under Section 32 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And under this power, the constable can search the arrested person or anything they may use to escape, evidence relating to offence, or any item that may cause a danger to themselves or others. If the offence for which he has been arrested is an indictable offence, under Section 32, the constable can then enter and search any premises in which the suspect was when he was arrested or immediately before, and search for evidence relating to the offence. under this Section 32 power, there is only power to search to the extent that is reasonably required for the purposes of discovering any such thing or evidence. So, for example, there, if you were looking for a machete, you would probably be criticised for looking inside a jewellery box during that search for the machete. The powers conferred by Section 32 of PACE to search a person are not to be construed as authorising a constable to require a person to remove any of his clothing in public other than an outer coat, jacket or gloves. A more thorough search would then be conducted at the station. In terms of a practical policing requirement as well, before conducting a stop and search, you would call the control room and you would let them know your location. You provide a description of the person that you're searching and tell them that you're going to conduct a stop and search. The reasons for this would be reasons of personal safety for the officer. If the officer suddenly activates their emergency button and requires assistance, everyone would know what is happening and where to go. As an additional note as well, it's important to note that when searching people under Section 1 PACE or under the Misuse of Drugs Act, officers are required to provide the grounds for which under which they're searching that person. They're required to tell them what they are actually searching for. If the officer is in plain clothes, they need to show the person detained their warrant card. They then need to identify themselves. Tell the person being searched what station they are attached to or what unit. Also to inform them they are entitled to a copy of the search form on completion of the search, and also to inform them that they are being detained for the purposes of a search. And there is a handy mnemonic to remind officers of this, and that is go wisely. Grounds object, warrant card, identity, station to which attached, entitled to a copy of the form, and you are being detained. So I hope you found that informative, the 4 scenarios that we went through. Now those 4 scenarios give a real broad brush over the very topical and emotive subject of stop and search. Lots of factors that we didn't even get to discuss there. There are other powers that we could have used. There is the issue around strip search, and many other factors involving searches that we obviously haven't had time to cover in this presentation. But what I'm hoping is that it gave you a bit of a flavour of the fact that the degree in professional policing is a very interesting degree. It throws up a lot of very interesting and emotive subjects and debates, and quite often there is no one correct answer. It's also a degree in which you will get a lot of practical experience. You will experience oral presentation, role plays, virtual reality work, and actively play out scenarios in a crime scene environment. So once again, really just to sum up, I think that the pre-joint degree that you can do in professional policing at universities around the country is an excellent way of, it's an excellent route into the police, particularly as you will probably be encouraged as well to become a special constable during probably your last 2 years of the degree. So at the conclusion of that degree, you'd have a 3-year academic qualification and background in policing. You'll have a couple of years experience of operational policing, which would make you an ideal candidate for recruitment into any police force up and down the country. And I would also say that even if you decide that policing isn't necessarily a career for you, this degree would also be particularly relevant to many other occupations across other forms of law enforcement, public sector, and probably many other areas as well. If you do have any questions or queries, you can obviously contact our university on there. However, there are obviously other universities around the country that do run similar degrees, but I'm happy to take any general inquiries anybody would like to make contact with me. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you found it interesting.